It was hidden for a reason, buried under layers of Boston cobblestone and a century and a half of sworn silence. No one was ever supposed to know this story. The official records, they were burned. The witnesses, they vanished. The house on Beacon Hill where it all happened, it was torn down in the dead of night. Every brick ground to dust and scattered in the harbor. They wanted to erase it from memory, from history itself. But some truths, they have roots. They bleed through the soil of time, staining the present with questions that were never meant to be asked. And the central question, the one that haunted a handful of people to their graves, is a simple one, a terrifying one. What happened to the Callahan sisters? Elara and Isolde. In the spring of 1871, they were 16 and 17 years old. Illuminous daughters of a shipping magnate, celebrated for their wit and their almost otherworldly beauty. In the winter of 1891, 20 years later, they were still 16 and 17 years old, not just in appearance, in every measurable biological way. They never grew older, not by a single day. And the secret of why, it wasn't a miracle. It was a transaction, a horrifying pact made in the shadows of America's most respected city. How did this vanish from history? How does something so impossible, so fundamental to our understanding of life and death, simply get buried? The answer is more frightening than the mystery itself. Because it suggests that the world you think you know is a carefully constructed stage, and behind the curtain are forces that control the very laws of nature for their own gain. This isn't just a story about two girls who stopped time. It's about what was stolen from them, and from us to keep their secret safe. It's about a power so profound it has shaped the world we live in today, and you don't even know it exists. But you're about to. This story found me in a way. A leather-bound trunk bought at a dusty estate sale in rural Massachusetts. Inside, not heirlooms, but a single wax-sealed journal. The private record of Dr. Alister Finch, a physician once celebrated in Boston society, then abruptly disgraced and committed to an asylum where he died in 1902. His crime? He refused to forget the Callahan sisters. You're not just watching this, you're becoming part of it. Dr. Finch's account begins not with the sisters, but with their father, Marcus Callahan, a man who clawed his way from the docks to the pinnacle of Boston society. He was ruthless, brilliant, and, according to Finch, possessed by a singular, all-consuming terror, the fear of loss. He had lost his wife to a sudden fever, and the experience unhinged him. He became obsessed with preservation, with permanence. He poured money into experimental medicine, into strange new philosophies whispering out of Europe. He was a man, Finch writes, who would bargain with any devil to keep what was his. In 1871, his daughters were his world. Elara the elder was sharp and questioning. Isolde was the artist, gentle and observant. They were the jewels of his life, but they were also fragile. A cough, a chill, the slightest sign of sickness would send Marcus into a panic. He kept them in a state of gilded quarantine, shielded from the world. Finch was the family physician, and he describes his growing unease. He saw two vibrant young women being slowly suffocated by a father's love, a love that was twisting into something possessive, something desperate. Then, in May of 1871, both sisters fell ill with the same wasting sickness that had claimed their mother. Finch's journal entries become frantic. He describes Marcus Callahan as a man on the brink of madness, refusing to accept the diagnosis, barring Finch from the girls' chambers for days at a time. When Finch was finally allowed back in, he found the girls changed. The fever was gone. The weakness had vanished. They were radiant, more vibrant than ever. But there was a stillness in their eyes, a strange, placid calm that didn't belong in two young women who had just stared death in the face. Marcus called it a miracle. He dismissed Finch with a generous but firm final payment. But Finch couldn't shake the feeling that he hadn't witnessed a recovery. He felt he had witnessed an exchange. Something had been taken from that house, and something else, something unnatural, had been invited in. He writes, "I saw not the blush of health upon their cheeks, but the cold polish of porcelain." For the next 5 years, Finch watched from a distance. The Callahan sisters became fixtures of Boston's elite social scene. But they were never truly a part of it. They were exhibits, perfectly preserved, always smiling, their laughter never quite reaching their eyes. They hosted salons, attended balls, but Finch noticed that their conversations were echoes of things they'd learned years before. Their opinions never evolved. Their jokes never changed. It was as if their minds, like their bodies, were caught in amber. They were beautiful dolls, animated by a memory of who they once were. The whispers began around 1876. At first, they were just idle gossip. How the Callahan girls never seemed to age. How their fashion sense was perpetually that of 5 years prior. But the rumor mill in a city like Boston, it grinds slow, but it grinds fine. Friends from their youth married, had children, and began to show the first touches of time on their faces. Not Elara and Isolde. They remained pristine, untouched. A whispered historical rumor from that time, found in a forgotten society column, reads, "To see the Callahan sisters is to see a photograph come to life. A moment of the past made permanent. One wonders if Mr. Callahan's love is a blessing or a taxidermist's art." This chilling observation was more prescient than its author could have ever known. Finch, now obsessed, began his own private investigation. He used his connections to speak with former servants from the Callahan estate. Most were tight-lipped, their silence bought with generous pensions. But one, a young housemaid named Clara, who had been dismissed, agreed to speak with him in secret. She told him of a man who visited the house during the girl's illness. A man who was not a doctor. He arrived in a carriage with no crest late at night. She described him as tall, and possibly thin with eyes that did not blink. He carried a locked iron box and met with Marcus Callahan for hours in the study. After he left, the house felt cold, permanently cold. She said the sisters, after their recovery, would sometimes just stop. They would stand in a hallway or sit in a chair for an hour or more, completely still, as if waiting for a command. Clara's testimony lit a fire in Finch's mind. The unblinking man, the iron box, this was no miracle cure. This was a procedure. He delved into the city's underbelly, into the world of occultists, charlatans, and back-alley physicians who catered to the desperate whims of the rich. He searched for any mention of men offering permanence. His journal from this period is a descent into a shadow world. He writes of secret auctions, where forbidden texts were sold for fortunes, of whispers about a cabal of Boston's most powerful men industrialists, judges, academics who sought to conquer not the world of commerce, but the world of natural law. They called themselves the Stygian Fellowship. Their goal was nothing less than the arrest of time itself. It sounded like madness, the ravings of a grieving man, but Finch was methodical. He cross-referenced names, dates, financial records. He discovered that a small elite group of men, Marcus Callahan among them, had been funneling vast sums of money into a front organization, the Boston Society for Chronological Study. Surface: it was a respectable academic group dedicated to history and preservation. But Finch suspected its true purpose was far darker. He believed they weren't just studying time. They were attempting to manipulate it. He found a strange correlation. Every man in this inner circle had suffered a profound loss, usually a wife or a child. They were united not by greed, but by a shared pathological terror of mortality. And they were willing to pay any price, to commit any sin, to defeat it. He writes, "They speak of progress and enlightenment, but their path leads back to the oldest, darkest magic. They seek the power of gods, but possess the hearts of frightened children willing to sacrifice anything or anyone to keep their toys from breaking. Honestly, what would you do if you had that kind of power? If you could freeze a perfect moment, a perfect person, and keep them forever, the temptation would be immense, and the cost unimaginable. By 1881, a full decade had passed since the sisters' miraculous recovery. They were now women in their late 20s, yet they still inhabited the bodies of teenagers. The illusion was beginning to break. What was once a curiosity was becoming a grotesque spectacle. Society, which had once fawned over them, now recoiled with a kind of fascinated horror. Invitations dwindled. The Callahan house on Beacon Hill became a place of rumor and dread. It was no longer a home. It was a museum of two living exhibits. Finch managed to arrange a meeting with Elara, the elder sister, under the pretense of a social call. He needed to see for himself. He describes the encounter in his journal with a sense of profound sorrow. He found her in the conservatory, surrounded by plants that had grown and withered and been replaced a dozen times over, while she remained the same. Her skin, he wrote, has the luminescence of fine marble, but also its coldness. Her eyes are bright, but the intelligence behind them is a recording. She spoke of a concert she attended last week, but the concert she described took place in 1872. I asked her about the future, about her dreams. She looked at me with a serene, beautiful emptiness and said, "The future is today, Dr. Finch. It is always today." It was the most chilling thing he had ever heard. She wasn't alive, not in any meaningful sense. She was looping. Her consciousness was trapped in the same cycle of memories repeating endlessly. She was a prisoner in her own perfect, unchanging body. The pact her father made didn't just stop her aging. It had stopped her from becoming. As he was leaving, she pressed a small folded piece of paper into his hand, her placid mask cracking for just a second. A flicker of sheer, unadulterated terror in her eyes. "He watches," she whispered. Her voice had a dry rustle. "He always watches." On the paper was a single cryptic drawing. A serpent eating its own tail, but inside the circle was a drawing of a blooming lotus flower slowly being constricted. A symbol of infinity, strangling a symbol of life and rebirth. It was a message, a cry for help from a soul trapped in a beautiful, unbreakable cage. The symbol, the Ouroboros strangling the lotus, became Finch's obsession. It wasn't a known alchemical or occult symbol. It was specific. It was a key. He spent months in the dusty archives of Boston's libraries poring over ancient texts looking for a match. He found it finally in a privately published, incredibly rare book bound in human skin. A text so vile it was only spoken of in hushed whispers. The Somnus Infinitum, or the Endless Sleep. The book wasn't about magic in the theatrical sense. It was a kind of proto-scientific manual, a grimoire of biological manipulation. It described a process, a transference where the vital regenerative life force, the bloom of one subject, could be used to create a state of stasis in another. It didn't grant immortality. It granted permanence. But the cost was monstrous. To make one thing permanent, something else had to be consumed. The process required a constant source of life force. It wasn't a one-time procedure. It was a subscription, a parasitic relationship. The book described the creation of a vessel, a biological anchor that would draw life energy from a source and channel it into the subject. The subject would be locked in perfect, unchanging stasis. The vessel would, well, the book was chillingly vague. It only referred to the vessel as the withered prince. The source, it implied, had to be a living thing rich in vitality. A drawing from Elara was a diagram. The serpent was the stasis, the endless loop. The lotus was the life force being consumed. The Callahan sisters weren't just frozen in time. They were the end point of a horrifying biological circuit. Their unnatural permanence was being fueled by the slow systematic draining of something or someone else. Suddenly, a series of strange disappearances that had plagued Boston's poorest districts over the past decade took on a terrifying new meaning. Young, healthy men and women plucked from the streets never could be seen again. The police had no leads. But Finch now had a theory too dark to contemplate. Were these lost souls the source? Were their lives the fuel for the sisters' endless youth? This was a machine of flesh and blood. Finch realized he was standing on the edge of a precipice. This was no longer just about the Callahan sisters. It was about a conspiracy that treated human life as a raw commodity. The Stygian Fellowship wasn't just a club for grieving fathers. It was a sophisticated vampiric enterprise. He had to find the vessel, the withered prince, the biological engine driving this whole nightmare. His search led him to a private sanatorium on the outskirts of Boston, an institution funded by a consortium of anonymous benefactors. A list of names that Finch found suspiciously similar to the membership of the Stygian Fellowship. The Brookline Asylum for the chronically afflicted. It wasn't for the mentally ill. It was for patients with rare degenerative diseases, or so they claimed. Finch used a forged letter of recommendation to gain access, posing as a physician interested in their novel treatment methods. The director, a cold, severe man named Dr. Silas Croft, showed him around the pristine, quiet facility. Everything was immaculate, orderly, and deeply unsettling. The patients were all kept in private rooms, their faces hidden behind veiled screens. Croft explained it was to grant them dignity. Finch knew it was to hide their identities. He managed to steal a patient manifest. On it he found a name that made his blood run cold. Thomas Callahan, Marcus Callahan's son, his firstborn child, who had reportedly died of a rare genetic disorder at the age of 10, years before the sisters were even born. But he hadn't died. He had been hidden. He was the vessel. He was the withered prince. In the dead of night, Finch picked the lock to Thomas's room. The description in his journal is the stuff of nightmares. Thomas was alive, if you could call it that. He was ancient, 100 years old in the body of a boy. His skin like parchment, his limbs atrophied, his breath a shallow whisper. But he was connected by a series of strange, wearing devices and glass tubes, filled with a faintly glowing fluid, to a central machine in the room. A machine that hummed with a low, predatory energy. And his eyes were open. They were ancient, lucid, and filled with an agony so profound. It was almost a physical force. He couldn't speak, but his eyes screamed. Finch had found the engine. Marcus Callahan hadn't just sacrificed strangers to preserve his daughters. He had sacrificed his own son. The horror of the discovery almost broke him. Marcus Callahan had turned his own son into a living battery, a withered, forgotten god, fueling the artificial lives of his perfect sisters. Thomas was the secret shame, the monstrous price for the family's miracle. His slow decay was their eternal youth. The glowing fluid in the tubes. It had to be the extracted life force, the bloom. It was being siphoned from Thomas, processed by this humming, arcane machine, and then somehow delivered to Elara and Isolde. But how? Finch knew he couldn't stay. Dr. Croft's eyes had held a glint of suspicion. He had to get out. But he couldn't leave without proof. He used a small syringe he brought to draw a sample of the glowing fluid from one of the tubes. He also saw, on a small table beside the bed, a silver locket. He took it. It was a desperate, foolish act, but he felt compelled, an instinct. He fled the asylum, his heart hammering against his ribs, the small, warm vial of fluid burning in his pocket. Back in his lab, he examined the substance under his most powerful microscope. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was not blood. It was not plasma. It was alive. Tiny, luminous particles, like microscopic stars, swam within the fluid, pulsing with a slow, rhythmic light. It was pure vitality, raw and refined. It was life itself, stripped of its vessel. A chilling quote from the Somnus Infinitum came back to him. The soul's light may be decanted, like fine wine, leaving the dregs behind. He opened the locket he'd taken. Inside were two miniature portraits. On one side, a young, healthy boy of about 10 before his transformation. On the other side was a portrait of a woman Finch didn't recognize, a beautiful woman with dark, defiant eyes. Underneath her portrait, a tiny inscription. Lenora, my life, my blue. Who was Lenora? And why was her portrait in a locket in Thomas's room? The name wasn't in any of the Callahan family records. It was another ghost. Another piece of the puzzle that hinted at an even deeper, more foundational crime than the one he had already uncovered. This machine didn't begin with Tanis. It began with her. Finch's investigation had become a frantic race against time. He knew the Fellowship would discover his infiltration of the asylum. They would hunt him. He had to expose the entire operation before they could silence him. He used his remaining contacts, calling in favors from men who owed him, to dig into Marcus Callahan's past, specifically searching for the name Lenora. The answer came back from a retired city clerk, a man with a long memory and a distaste for Boston's elite. Lenora was not a society woman. She was an inventor, a brilliant, self-taught engineer and biologist who, in the 1850s, had been on the verge of revolutionary discoveries in cellular regeneration. She had published preliminary papers, attracting both acclaim and condemnation for her radical ideas about manipulating life force. She believed aging was not inevitable, but a flaw in the cellular code that could be corrected. Then, in 1858, she vanished. Her lab burned to the ground in mysterious fire. Her research was lost. The official report called it a tragic accident. The clerk told Finch something else. He said that Marcus Callahan, then a young, ambitious industrialist, had been her primary benefactor. He had been obsessed with her, not just her mind, but with her. He had proposed marriage. She had refused, wanting to remain independent, dedicated to her work. Shortly after her refusal, her lab burned and she disappeared. Callahan, a few months later, married his socially acceptable wife, the mother of his children. The truth was an avalanche of horror. Marcus Callahan hadn't just found the Somnus Infinitum. He had stolen its principles from Lenora. He had coveted her genius, and when he couldn't possess her, he took her work, likely killing her and destroying her lab to erase his theft. The entire Stygian Fellowship, the entire horrifying machine of sacrifice, was built on the stolen genius of a woman history had deliberately forgotten. This wasn't just about preserving his children. This was about a legacy of theft and murder. Lenora was the first victim. She was the original source, and Finch suspected, with a cold dread, that her research had been far more advanced and far more dangerous than even the Somnus Infinitum suggested. The pieces were now falling into place, forming a picture of evil so systematic, so deeply embedded in the city's power structure, that Finch felt a wave of utter despair. The Callahan sisters were not just a family tragedy. They were the living symbols of a monstrous secret society built on stolen knowledge and human sacrifice. The Stygian Fellowship didn't just preserve their loved ones. They used this stolen technology as the ultimate tool of control. Finch found evidence of financial records, blackmail, political manipulation. Men who opposed the Fellowship's interests found their careers ruined, their families threatened. Judges made inexplicable rulings. Politicians voted against the public interest. The Fellowship's influence was like a cancer spreading through the arteries of the city. This Stasis technology wasn't just used on their children. He found whispers of its other applications. A political rival silenced not by death, but by being locked in a state of living catatonia in a private asylum. A brilliant business competitor, his mind frozen just before a major breakthrough. It was the perfect weapon. A murder that left no corpse. A prison that left no chains. Can you imagine that? The ability to simply pause someone, to remove them from the board without a trace of violence. The power would be absolute. Finch knew he was no longer just an investigator. He was a threat to an invisible empire. He began to see shadows everywhere. Men in gray coats watching his apartment. His mail was being tampered with. Friends suddenly grew distant. Their eyes filled with fear when he approached. He was being isolated, prepared for removal. He hid his journal, the vial of fluid, and the locket in the false bottom of the leather trunk, entrusting it to the only person he thought he could trust, his estranged brother in the countryside, with instructions to open it only upon his death. He knew was coming. His final journal entry before his committal is almost a whisper. They will say I am mad. They will use the tools of my own profession to discredit me. They will bury me in a white, walled room and tell the world I was a victim of delusion. But I am not mad. I have seen the machine beneath the garden. I have seen the withered god that powers the ageless angels. The truth is in this book. The truth bleeds through. Find it. Avenge us. Avenge Lenore. The official story of Dr. Alister Finch's decline was swift and tragic. The Boston Medical Society published a statement declaring him a danger to himself and his patients, citing a profound obsession with fanciful conspiracies and morbid delusions. His friends and colleagues testified to his increasingly erratic behavior. His family, no doubt under duress, agreed to his commitment. He was erased from society as neatly and efficiently as a line of chalk on a blackboard. He spent the last 10 years of his life in the Danvers State Asylum, where records show he never spoke another word. He would simply sit by the window, staring towards Boston, occasionally tracing a symbol in the dust on the windowsill, a serpent eating its own tail with a dying lotus inside. And what of the Callahan sisters? After Finch's disgrace, they were withdrawn from society completely. The grand house on Beacon Hill became a fortress. Marcus Callahan lived until 1899, a recluse in his own home, guarding his perfect ageless daughters. Upon his death, the will was a strange and chilling document. It left the entire Callahan fortune to a charitable trust managed by a board of directors, whose names were a who's who of the Stygian Fellowship. The will's primary instruction was the perpetual care of his afflicted children, Elara and Isolde, and the unfortunate Thomas, ensuring they would be comfortable and undisturbed for the natural remainder of their lives. A life that for the sisters would never end. The house was to be maintained as their private residence, sealed from the outside world. They became Boston's most famous ghosts, the girls who never grew old, living specters in a mansion no one could enter. The story became a local legend, a piece of Gothic folklore told to frighten children. The dark truth, of course, was locked away with them. But the machine required fuel. The disappearances didn't stop. They just became more subtle, more difficult to track, managed by the Fellowship's vast resources. The withered prints in the asylum still needed to be fed. The porcelain dolls in the mansion still needed their stolen bloom. If you've come this far, comment "The truth bleeds through" below. You're beginning to understand that some legends are true. The end of the story, as far as the world knew, came in 1905. A massive fire starting in the boiler room consumed the Callahan mansion in a matter of hours. The blaze was so intense that the entire structure collapsed into the foundation. When the ashes cooled, investigators found almost nothing. The official report stated that Marcus Callahan's two daughters, Elara and Isolde, perished in the fire. Due to the extreme heat, their remains were unrecoverable. It was a neat, tidy ending, a tragic but plausible conclusion to a strange family story. But Finch's journal tells a different story. He foresaw this. In a section written during his paranoid final days of freedom, he speculated on the Fellowship's end game. "They cannot let the sisters be discovered," he wrote. "As medical science advances, their condition would become an uncontainable curiosity. A single blood sample under a modern microscope would expose everything. The stasis is a relic of a bygone era. They will not risk it. They will not cure them. They will cleanse the board. They will burn the evidence. They will call it a tragedy. The fire wasn't an accident. It was a cleansing, a final brutal act of erasure. The Stygian Fellowship was severing its ties to its most visible, most dangerous secret. They were future-proofing their conspiracy. But there was one detail from the fire that never made sense. A detail whispered among the firemen for years. They found no bodies. Not a bone fragment. Not a shred of tissue. Nothing. It was as if the sisters had simply evaporated. The Fellowship's explanation was the intensity of the heat. But experienced fire marshals knew better. Even in the most horrific infernos, something is always left. The rumor was that the sisters were removed before the fire was even set. That the Fellowship, with its arcane knowledge, had found a new way to deal with their assets. That Elara and Isolde were not destroyed, but simply relocated. Put back into storage. Waiting for a time when their secret could be safely revived. This is where the story truly descends from history into a living nightmare. Because if they weren't destroyed, where did they go? This question haunted the few who knew pieces of the truth. What do you do with two perfectly preserved 17-year-old women who are in reality nearly 50 years old? You can't release them. You can't kill them in any conventional way. You have to hide them. After the fire, the Stygian Fellowship began to evolve. They shed their 19th century occult trappings and morphed into something far more modern and insidious. They became a foundation, a philanthropic trust, a biomedical research institute. They moved their wealth and influence out of the gaslit parlors of Boston and into the sterile boardrooms and laboratories of the 20th century. Their names are on universities, hospitals, research grants. They became the quiet, unseen architects of the future. And their core project, the conquest of aging and decay, never stopped. It just went deeper underground. Finch's journal gives us the most terrifying clue. He discovered from a text he referenced, a footnote in the Somnus Infinitum, that the stasis effect could be enhanced. It could be made dormant. The subject could be placed in a state of suspended animation so profound that they would register as dead to all but the most esoteric examination. A state called the cold lacuna. The text described a ritual using specific chemical compounds and resonant frequencies that could induce the state. It also described how to reverse it. It was a biological off switch. My theory: the Fellowship didn't term the sisters. They put them to sleep. They switched them off. They could be anywhere. In the sub-basement of a private hospital. In a cryo vault at a research facility. Hidden in plain sight. Two perfect porcelain dolls waiting for their masters to wind them up again. The fire was just a theatrical cover. The real horror is that the Callahan sisters could still be out there. Their strange, impossible youth preserved in a secret sleeping state, a living testament to a power that has hidden itself from the world. A power that has only grown stronger, more sophisticated, and is still operating today just under the surface of our reality. They are the ultimate secret weapon, the ultimate proof of concept, and the men who control them are no longer just Boston industrialists. They are the hidden kings of the modern world. Now, we must talk about the fuel. Thomas, the withered prince. The fire at the Callahan mansion was a public spectacle, but a quiet, unremarked upon event happened the very next day. The Brookline Asylum for the chronically afflicted had its own, much smaller, fire. A minor electrical fire confined to a single patient's room in a remote wing. The patient, an unidentified male who had been there for decades, died of smoke inhalation. His records were lost in the blaze. His body was cremated before any family could be notified. Another neat, tidy ending. Silas Croft, the asylum's director, retired with a generous pension and moved to a private island in the Caribbean. The fellowship was cleaning house. They were severing every link to their 19th century origins. Thomas, the engine of the whole machine, was no longer needed. The sisters were dormant. The technology had likely evolved. They no longer needed a single withered vessel. Perhaps they had found a more efficient way to harvest the bloom. Perhaps the network of disappearances became a global industrial-scale operation. Think about it. The 20th century was filled with chaos, wars, famines, genocides, unprecedented opportunities for a quiet, methodical organization to harvest human vitality on a massive scale, completely unnoticed amidst the larger tragedies. The fellowship's methods grew with the times. They graduated from snatching paupers off the streets of Boston to manipulating global events. A chilling thought from one of Finch's more speculative entries. What if war is not a failure of diplomacy, but a successful harvest? What if the chaos that terrifies us is the ecology that feeds them? This is the true scope of the conspiracy Finch stumbled upon. It wasn't just about two girls. It was about a hidden system of power that feeds on human life, a system that has woven itself into the fabric of our history. The vial of fluid Finch stole from Thomas's room. I had it analyzed. I used a contact at a private cutting-edge genetics lab, telling them it was a sample from an anonymous archaeological dig. The results were inconclusive and terrifying. The lead scientist called me, his voice trembling. He said the substance defied all known biological principles. It contains human mitochondrial DNA, but it was structured in a way that was theoretically impossible. He said it appeared to be a liquid form of pure cellular energy exhibiting quantum properties. He couldn't explain. He begged me to tell him where it came from. I told him I couldn't. 2 days later, his lab had a catastrophic server crash. All the data from the analysis was lost. All of his backups were corrupted. He was placed on indefinite administrative leave. They know I have it. And they are still cleaning house. You have to understand the psychology of these men. The members of the Stygian Fellowship, they don't see themselves as evil. They see themselves as pioneers, as saviors. They believe that humanity, with its messiness, its decay, its mortality, is a flawed creation. They believe they are perfecting it. They are the gardeners, and we are the weeds, or occasionally the prized orchids to be preserved. In their worldview, sacrificing a few or a few million for the sake of achieving ultimate control over life and death is not a crime. It is a noble, necessary act of evolution. They are post-human. They have elevated themselves beyond the common moral framework. Finch understood this. He wrote, "To argue with them about morality is like arguing with a surgeon about the sanctity of the flesh he cuts." They see only the system, the mechanism. They have lost the ability to see the soul within the machine. And their power comes not just from their wealth, but from their secrecy and their patience. They plan in terms of centuries, not years. They have built a dynasty of knowledge passed down from one generation to the next. The children of the original members are now the elder statesmen of our world. They sit on the boards of global corporations. They fund political campaigns. They shape public opinion through media empires. You have probably seen their faces on the news, read their names in financial reports. You admire their success, their longevity, their seemingly ageless vigor. You attribute it to good genes, clean living, expensive health care. You don't see the dark machinery working behind the scenes. You don't see the price that was paid and is still being paid for their good fortune. The Callahan sisters were their first successful experiment, a prototype. How many more had there been since? How many influential figures in our world, who seem to defy the ravages of time, are part of this program? What if the secret to their power isn't just money? What if it's time itself? What if they have mastered the art of stealing it from others? This is the core of the forbidden's truth. The world is not run by the people you think. It is run by a quiet few who have conquered the one thing the rest of us cannot escape: death. Let's talk about the housemaid Clara. She's the one who told Finch about the unblinking man. Her testimony was the first crack in the facade. After speaking with Finch, she disappeared. Her family was told she had taken a new position with a wealthy family in England and would be traveling for many years. She was never heard from again. But Finch, in his meticulous way, kept digging. He discovered that the wealthy family in England was a fiction. The ticket she had supposedly purchased was for a ship that didn't exist. She was another loose end, neatly tied up and disposed. But Clara was clever. She was terrified of Marcus Callahan and his associates. She left something behind, an insurance policy. She wrote a long, detailed letter, a full confession of everything she saw and suspected, and gave it to her priest with instructions that it should only be opened if she went missing. The priest, an honest man named Father Michael, was horrified. When Clara vanished, he went to the police. He presented the letter. An investigation was opened, and then it was promptly closed. Father Michael was visited by two well-dressed gentlemen who spoke to him about the reputational damage such a fantastical story could do to the church and to him personally. They mentioned the orphanage the church ran and how its funding depended on the generosity of certain benefactors. The message was clear. The letter vanished from the police evidence locker. Father Michael was transferred to a remote parish in the far west, where he died a few years later of a sudden illness. The system protected itself. It was flawless. But they missed one thing. Before Father Michael was transferred, he did something incredibly brave. He made a copy of Clara's letter, and he hid it. He hid it in the back of the oldest Bible in his new remote church. And there it sat for over a century. A forgotten testimony. A ghost's cry in the wilderness. It was found in 2019 when the church was being decommissioned. The letter, in Clara's desperate looping script, confirms every detail of Finch's investigation. But it adds one more chilling detail. She saw what was in the iron box the unblinking man brought to the house. She peeked through the keyhole of the study. It wasn't medical equipment. It was a small, ornate cage. And inside the cage was a bird. A nightingale, she wrote, that sang a song that made the glass tremble. A nightingale. The detail seems poetic, almost absurd. But it fits with the esoteric, pseudo-scientific nature of the fellowship. The Somnus Infinum speaks of using resonant frequencies and auditory catalysts to activate the stasis process. It mentions that a specific harmonic vibration is needed to lock the cellular structure in place. What if the nightingale wasn't just a bird? What if its song was the key? A specific, unique biological sound that acted as the final switch in dying. The procedure. A living instrument. Clara wrote that after the bird sang, a fine, shimmering dust filled the room, and the sisters, who were lying on couches, seemed to fall into a sleep deeper than death. When they awoke, they were changed. This detail opens up a new, terrifying avenue. The Fellowship's technology wasn't just chemical or mechanical. It was bio-acoustic. It was based on harnessing the unique properties of living things, twisting them to their own purpose. And it implies that their methods are far more subtle and harder to detect than Finch ever imagined. You wouldn't need a massive, humming machine if the catalyst was something as simple and transient as a sound. The procedure could be done anywhere. The technology could be portable. The iron box, it could be a complete kit. Think about the implications. What other natural phenomena have they weaponized? What other secrets of biology have they twisted into tools of control? We see the world through the lens of modern science, a science they have carefully curated and funded. What if there is a whole other branch of physics, of biology that they have kept for themselves? A shadow science that runs parallel to our own, a science that operates on principles we would dismiss as magic or fantasy. The Nightingale is a clue that the reality we inhabit is only a fraction of the whole truth. It tells us that the deepest secrets are not hidden in vaults or computer servers. They are hidden in plain sight, in the song of a bird, in the resonance of a crystal, in the biology we think we understand. And that is why they are so powerful. Because we don't even know what to look for. We don't even know the right questions to ask. Let's return to the sisters themselves. Elara and Isolde. What was it like for them? We have Finch's observations, Clara's testimony. But what was their internal experience? Finch believed their consciousness was looping, trapped in the cycle of old memories. But what if it was worse than that? What if they were aware of the passage of time, of the world changing around them, while they remained helplessly, horribly static? Imagine watching your friends grow old and die. Watching the world you knew transform into something alien, with new technologies, new customs, new faces everywhere, all while you are trapped in the body and mind of a 17-year-old. It wouldn't be a blessing. It would be the most exquisite form of torture ever devised. A silent, solitary hell. A disturbing real world quote comes to mind from the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. There are no beautiful surfaces without a terrible depth. The serene, placid beauty of the Callahan sisters was the surface. The terrible depth was a conscious screaming soul trapped inside. There is a hint of this in Finch's journal. In his final, desperate attempt to understand, he sought out a medium, a popular spiritualist in Boston, Madame Eva. He was a man of science, and he despised what he saw as cheap theatrics. But he was desperate. He brought the locket he had stolen from Thomas's room. Madame Eva went into a trance. She didn't channel spirits of the dead. She channeled something else. She began to speak in two voices overlapping, one sharp and angry, the other soft and weeping, Elara and Isolde. The transcript Finch made is fragmented, almost incoherent. But some phrases stand out. The clock is a liar. A painted face, the song pins us down. Father made a mirror, and we are trapped behind the glass. So much noise. The world is so loud now, he is so hungry. The boy in the dark room is so hungry. And then, the most chilling line of all, spoken in a single, unified, desperate whisper, let us break. Please, let us break. They wanted to die. They were begging for the release of decay, of aging, of death. The miracle their father had given them was their damnation. And they were fully, horribly aware of every second of it. This revelation changes everything. They were not passive dolls. They were conscious prisoners. Elara's note to Finch, her whispered, "He watches," was not just a warning. It was a calculated risk, a desperate attempt to communicate with the outside world. And the drawing she gave him, the serpent and the lotus, it wasn't just a symbol she had seen. It was a diagnosis. She understood, on some level, the nature of her own condition. She was trying to show him the mechanism of her prison. This paints the sisters in a new light. They were not just victims. They were fighters in the only way they could be. Silent, subtle saboteurs of their own gilded cage. This idea is supported by another of Clara's observations from her hidden letter. She said that in the years after their transformation, the sisters developed a secret language, a series of quiet gestures, hand signals, and shared glances. They would have entire conversations without speaking a word, especially when their father or other members of the fellowship were present. Clara believed it was just a sisterly quirk. But what if it was more? What if they were planning scheming, sharing information, keeping their own minds active against the encroaching, timeless stasis? What if they were looking for a way to break the spell? This suggests that the stasis was not perfect. It had flaws. It could be resisted. The human will, the conscious soul, could fight back against the biological prison. Perhaps the looping consciousness Finch observed was not a feature of the stasis, but a defense mechanism the sisters created. A way to anchor their minds, to prevent them from dissolving completely into the endless empty today. They were not just waiting for a rescue, they were trying to orchestrate it. The fire in 1905, we assumed the fellowship started it to erase them. But what if we're wrong? What if the sisters themselves started it? What if that was their final desperate act of rebellion? A way to destroy the house, to destroy themselves, and perhaps to destroy the machine that bound them to this world. It's a terrifying thought that their only escape was self-immolation. But it's also a story of incredible tragic courage. A final no screamed into the face of a power that had tried to steal their very souls. If the sisters started the fire, it reframes the entire narrative. It means they were not just chess pieces, they were players. But it also raises a terrible question. Did it work? Did they succeed in destroying themselves? Or did the fellowship intervene, rescuing them from their suicide attempt and putting them into the cold lacuna against their will? The evidence is ambiguous. A lack of remains could support either theory. But there is one more detail from the unpublished notes of the fire marshal who investigated the scene. A man named Captain Hewitt. He was an honest, thorough investigator, and he was deeply troubled by the case. His official report was clean, concise. But his private notes, which his grandson donated to a historical archive, tell a different story. Hewitt found something in the ashes of the conservatory. The one place where Elora felt some peace. It was the melted, warped remains of a small iron cage. A nightingale's cage. But inside it, he found something that shouldn't have been there. The charred, but still identifiable, remains of a complex clockwork mechanism. A timer. And it was connected to what appeared to be a chemical ignition system. It was a bomb. An incendiary device designed to start a fire of unimaginable intensity. Hewitt knew what it meant. He knew the fire was deliberate. He took the evidence to his superiors. He was told, in no uncertain terms, to drop it. He was told the case was closed. He was reminded he had a family, a pension to protect. He complied, but he kept the notes. He knew the truth. The sisters had tried to burn their prison to the ground. This wasn't a suicide. It was an attack. They weren't just trying to free themselves. They were trying to destroy the fellowship's research, to burn away the secret of their existence. They were trying to take their enemies with them. This act of defiance, this final fiery rebellion, is their true legacy. Not their timeless beauty, but their desperate, violent attempt to reclaim their own mortality. And it makes the possibility of their survival even more tragic. To have fought so hard, to have come so close, only to be recaptured and put to sleep by the very monsters they were trying to destroy. So, where does this leave us? With a story that has no clean ending, a conspiracy that has evolved beyond recognition, and two sisters who may or may not be sleeping in a hidden vault, somewhere waiting for the dawn of a new age. The Stygian Fellowship in its modern form is more powerful than ever. They have learned from their mistakes. Their methods are more subtle. Their control is more absolute. They are no longer a cabal of Boston Brahmins. They are a global, invisible network. They are in the code of the algorithms that shape your reality. They are in the chemical formulas of the medicines you take. They are in the silent hum of the satellites that watch you from above. They have perfected the art of hiding in plain sight, and the technology born from Lenore's stolen genius and the blood of the withered prince has likely advanced to a degree we cannot even comprehend. Perhaps they no longer need a stasis. Perhaps they have achieved true regeneration, true immortality, the ability to reverse aging, to cure any disease, a power they keep for themselves and a select few they deem worthy. The ultimate form of control. Think of the people who truly run the world, the ones who seem to never lose, who seem to operate on a level of foresight and influence that is almost inhuman. We call them geniuses, titans, visionaries. What if they are simply old, very, very old? What if they are the original members of the fellowship, their lives extended by a century of stolen vitality, still playing the great game with the wisdom and ruthlessness of ages? It's a terrifying thought that we are living in a world still secretly ruled by 19th century robber barons who have found the ultimate cheat code. The Callahan sisters were the key to it all. Their tragedy was the foundation of this modern empire of shadows. And their story, buried for so long, is not just a ghost story. It's a warning. It's a map that shows us the blueprint of the prison we all live in without even knowing it. You're not supposed to know this, but some secrets refuse to stay buried. The journal of Dr. Alister Finch is my source. Clara's letter is my proof. But the final piece of this puzzle came from a place I never expected. The locket. The one Finch stole from Thomas's room. The one with the portrait of Lenora, the murdered inventor. I spent months trying to find her living relatives. It was almost impossible. Her family line had been systematically scrubbed from records. But I finally found one. A great-great-grandniece living a quiet life as a librarian in Vermont. I went to see her. I showed her the locket. She had never seen it before, but she recognized the face. It was her great-great-granddad, Lenora. And she told me a story passed down through the women in her family, a whispered secret. They said that Lenora was not just an inventor. She was a mother. She had a son, a brilliant, beautiful boy. But the boy had a secret, a flaw, a rare genetic condition that was causing his body to age at a terrifyingly accelerated rate. A disease that would have him old by the time he was a teenager. Lenora's research, her obsessive work on cellular regeneration, it wasn't for fame or for humanity. It was for him. She was trying to save her son, and the name of her son, Thomas. The withered prince was not Marcus Callahan's son. He was Lenore's. Callahan didn't just steal her research. He stole her child. He took the boy, her reason for living, and twisted her research, her cure, into a curse. He used her son as the engine to power his own daughter's stasis. This is the foundational crime. The original sin upon which the entire fellowship was built. It wasn't just murder and theft. It was the perversion of a mother's love. Callahan took the cure she was creating for her dying son and used it to turn his own healthy daughters into immortal, lifeless objects. It is an act of evil so profound, so personal, that it almost defies comprehension. The story isn't just about stolen life. It's about stolen love, stolen motherhood, a stolen future. And it makes the silent agony of Thomas, the withered prince, even more heartbreaking. He wasn't just a victim. He was the betrayed and forgotten son of the very genius whose work was being used to torture him. This final revelation recontextualizes everything. Marcus Callahan's actions were not born of a father's grief. They were born of a monstrous, possessive envy. He coveted Lenore's genius. He coveted her son, a child more brilliant than his own. When he couldn't have her, he took everything that was hers and twisted it into a monument to his own ego. The Callahan sisters were living trophies. Proof that he, Marcus Callahan, could conquer time using the tools of the woman who had rejected him. The Stygian Fellowship was not a brotherhood of grieving fathers. It was a club of entitled monsters who believed their wealth gave them the right to own anything and anyone. They were the ultimate patriarchs, willing to sacrifice their own children and the children of others to maintain their control. They didn't fear loss. They feared irrelevance. They feared the natural order, where the old must make way for the new. They sought to stop that cycle, to establish a permanent, unchanging world with them at the top. A world where their daughters would never leave them, where their power would never fade. It is the ultimate expression of tyrannical narcissism. And it's a pattern we see repeated throughout history. Men of power trying to stop the clock, trying to control the uncontrollable, leaving a trail of broken lives in their wake. The story of the Callahan sisters is not a unique anomaly. It is the most extreme example of a timeless human darkness. A darkness that wears the mask of progress, of love, of protection, but which is, at its core, nothing more than a terrified, ravenous ego consuming the world to feed its own fear of the end. This is the lesson Finch learned, the one that drove him to what the world called madness. He saw that the greatest monsters are not creatures from stories. They are men who have convinced themselves that their desires are more important than the lives of others. Men who would burn the world to see themselves reflected in the ashes. Now, you must ask yourself, why this story and why now? The journal of Dr. Finch, Clara's letter, the fire marshal's notes, these pieces have been scattered for a century. Why are they surfacing at the same time? I believe it's because the system is beginning to crack. The Fellowship, for all its power and planning, is not infallible. A century of secrets is a heavy burden to carry. New technologies, the very ones they helped to create, are becoming a threat. DNA analysis, global information networks, the digital ghosts of every transaction and communication. The world is becoming harder to control. Secrets are harder to keep. Perhaps a faction within the Fellowship itself is leaking this information. A younger generation, horrified by the sins of their fathers, trying to expose the truth from the inside. Or perhaps it's something else. Perhaps the stasis technology itself is becoming unstable. Perhaps the porcelain dolls are beginning to crack on their own. The energy that sustains them cannot be maintained forever. The laws of nature, the true laws, can be bent, but they cannot be permanently broken. Entropy always wins. The universe demands its payment. There is a concept in physics known as quantum entanglement. Two particles linked in a mysterious way, no matter how far apart they are. What happens to one instantly affects the other. What if the bloom, the life force, operates on a similar principle? What if all the souls the Fellowship has consumed over the decades are still connected? A vast, invisible network of stolen lives. And what if that network is beginning to push back, What if the ghosts are finally rising, not in a supernatural sense, but in a quantum physical one? What if the truth is not just being uncovered, but is actively forcing its way into our reality? The story of the Callahan sisters is not just a warning from the past. It may be a harbinger of a coming storm, a reckoning that has been brewing in the shadows for over 150 years. I have to believe that Finch's efforts were not in vain. That Clara's courage, Father Michael's faith, Captain Hewitt's integrity, that these small acts of defiance mattered. They kept a spark of the truth alive, passed down through the dark decades like a secret flame. Now, that flame has been passed to you. You who are watching this, you are the next link in the chain. This knowledge is dangerous. It changes the way you see the world. You will start to see the patterns. You will notice the figures who seem to defy time. You will question the official narratives of history. You will see the hand of the fellowship in the strange currents of power that shape our lives. They will want to dismiss this. They will call it a conspiracy theory, a work of fiction. They will use their vast resources to discredit it, to bury it again. They will try to make you believe that the world is exactly as it seems, that powerful men are just lucky, and that history is just a series of random accidents. But you will know better. You will know about the house on Beacon Hill. You will know about the withered prince in the asylum. You will know about Lenora, the murdered genius, and her stolen son. And you will know about Elara and Isolde, the girls trapped behind the mirror of time. This knowledge is now a part of you. It's a responsibility. What you do with it is up to you. You can dismiss it, forget it, and go back to the comfortable sleep they have designed for you. Or you can watch. You can listen. You can look for the cracks in the facade. You can share this story. You can keep the flame alive, because the only thing that a secret society of shadows truly fears is the light. They can erase records. They can silence witnesses. They can burn down houses. But they cannot erase a truth once it has taken root in the minds of millions. They are powerful. But they are few, and we are many. There is one last piece of this story, a loose end that has haunted me since I first opened Finch's journal. The nightingale. The living instrument whose song locked the sisters in time. What happened to it? The cage Hewitt found in the ashes was empty. According to Clara's letter, after the procedure, the unblinking man took the bird and left. He did not kill it. He placed it back in its ornate cage and took it with him. Why? Why keep the key? Why not destroy it? The Somnus Infinitum provides a possible and utterly horrifying answer. It states that the auditory catalyst is unique and non-replicable. Its specific harmonic signature is tied to the initial procedure. As the key locks, the text reads, so too may it unlock. The same song that binds may also release. The fellowship kept the nightingale alive. For over a century, they must have preserved it, using their own twisted science to extend its life, just as they did the sisters. It was their fail-safe, their reset button, the one tool that could undo the stasis. Why would they need that? Perhaps in case the sisters' prison began to fail, or perhaps for a more sinister reason. As the ultimate bargaining chip, the promise of release used to ensure the sisters' psychological compliance, or perhaps the most terrifying possibility of all. They kept it because they intend to use it. They intend to wake the sisters up. Why? Why now? I can only speculate. Perhaps their technology has advanced so far that they can now cure the flaws in the original stasis. Perhaps they want to study their oldest subjects to learn from the 150-year-old experiment. Or perhaps they have a new role for Elara and Isolde to play in the 21st century. Imagine the power of presenting two living, breathing, 17-year-old girls from the 1870s to the world. It would be the ultimate revelation, the ultimate demonstration of their power. A way to finally step out of the shadows and be worshipped as gods. The return of the Callahan sisters might not be the end of the conspiracy. It might be the beginning of its final public phase. The day they reveal themselves to the world. So the search for truth leads not to an ending, but to a state of suspense. A waiting game. We are waiting for the fellowship to make its next move, and I believe that move is coming soon. The evidence I've gathered, the story I've told you, It's not just a history lesson. It is an active threat to their secrecy. And they will respond. They always respond. I don't know what form that response will take. Perhaps a sophisticated campaign of disinformation. Perhaps a direct attack on the sources of this information. On me. But I've taken precautions just as Finch did. I have distributed his journal, Clara's letter, all of my research to multiple trusted sources in multiple countries with instructions for their automatic release if I should meet with an untimely accident or be declared a mad D. I have learned from the past. I will not let this truth be buried again. But the greatest protection is not my own network of dead man switches. It's you, your attention, your memory, your refusal to accept the comfortable lies. Every time this story is shared, every time someone new learns about the Callahan sisters, the Fellowship's grip on the world weakens just a little. Their power is rooted in our ignorance. Our power is rooted in our shared knowledge. This is the war. They have been fighting in the shadows for over a century. A zero, some war for control of reality itself. And tonight, whether you knew it or not, you have been enlisted as a soldier in that war. You have been given a map of the battlefield and a glimpse of the enemy. An enemy that has been hiding in plain sight. An enemy that has shaped the world you were born into. An enemy that believes you are nothing more than fuel for their machine. But they are wrong. The human spirit, the desire for truth, for justice, it is a force of nature they have never been able to truly extinguish. Not in Lenore, not in Finch, and not in the two sisters who set their own prison on fire. I often think about the vial of glowing fluid that I still possess, the sample of pure life force that Finch stole from Thomas's room. It sits in a lead-lined box in a secure, undisclosed location. It is the last physical piece of evidence from that time. The last tangible remnant of the machine. Sometimes I am tempted to destroy it, to pour it into the earth and let it dissipate. It feels like a cursed object, a concentration of so much pain and suffering. But I can't, because it's also something else. It's proof. It's the one thing that their science cannot explain away. It is the impossible object that proves the impossible story is true. And it may be the key to undoing their work. If Lenora's genius could be reverse-engineered from this sample, if her original benevolent intentions could be rediscovered, perhaps a true cure could be found. Not just for the sisters, but for the disease of power and greed that created them. Perhaps the cure for the Fellowship lies in the very substance they created to sustain themselves. A poetic justice that I think Dr. Finch would have appreciated. This is my hope, that this story will not just be a warning, but a catalyst, that it will inspire a new generation of investigators, of scientists, of truth-tellers, who will not be intimidated, who will pick up the trail that Finch left behind, who will dare to ask the forbidden questions, and who will, finally, expose the Stygian Fellowship to the light. The truth is out there, scattered in archives, hidden in old letters, buried in the code of corporate balance sheets. It's a puzzle with a million pieces. I have given you the corner pieces. It's up to you to help fill in the rest. Look for the patterns. Question the timelines. Follow the money. And never ever believe that history is settled. It is a living, breathing thing. And it can be rewritten. The ghosts of the past are speaking. It's time we started to listen. What does it mean to be timeless? We romanticize the idea. We see it as a form of perfection, eternal youth, endless beauty. But the story of the Callahan sisters shows us the truth. To be timeless is to be lifeless. Life is motion. Life is change. Life is growth and decay. It is the constant, messy, beautiful process of becoming. To arrest that process is to commit a profound violence against the very nature of existence. It is to create a statue, not a person. The Stygian Fellowship in their arrogance believed they were conquering death. But they didn't. They just created a more elegant, more horrifying form of it. A living death. A death of the soul trapped inside a shell of unchanging flesh. And in their quest to control life, they became the ultimate agents of death, consuming countless lives to fuel their illusion of permanence. They are the true withered princes. Their souls have been decaying for 150 years, even as their influence grows. This is the ultimate paradox of their power. To hold on to everything, they had to lose themselves. They are the ghosts now, haunting the corridors of power. Their humanity a distant memory, replaced by a cold, calculating hunger for control. And the sisters, whether they are sleeping in a vault or were reduced ash, they the ultimate victim of that hunger. They are a symbol of all the beauty, all the potential, all the life that is sacrificed at the altar of power. Theirs is not just a story from the past. It is the story of our world written in the language of Gothic horror. It is the story of what we lose, individually and collectively, when we allow a small, frightened few to dictate the terms of our existence. It is the secret that underpins our entire civilization. But secrets have a shelf life, and this one is long past its expiration date. The truth is bleeding through, and it cannot be contained any longer. In the end, this story is a choice. You can choose to believe it, or you can choose to dismiss it. You can see it as a tangled web of historical facts, rumors, and speculation, or you can see it as a glimpse into the hidden machinery of the world. But I ask you to consider this. If a power like this did exist, a power to stop time, to erase people, to control history, isn't this exactly what the world would look like? A world of unexplained inequalities, of seemingly invincible dynasties, of secrets and lies that stretch back for generations. A world where the official story never quite seems to add up. Maybe the greatest trick the Fellowship ever pulled was not convincing the world they didn't exist, but convincing us that this broken, manipulated world is the only one that's possible, that it's just the way things are. They have normalized their own monstrosity. They have made their prison our reality. Dr. Finch died believing he was a failure. He died alone in an asylum, his name disgraced, his life's work buried. He never knew if his journal would be found. He never knew if the truth would ever come out. But he did it anyway. He stood up. He spoke out. He wrote it all down in the desperate hope that someone someday would listen. Tonight, we have listened. We have bore witness to his courage. We have heard the whispers of Clara, the pleas of Elara and Isolde, the silent scream of Thomas. We have honored the memory of Lenora. We have pulled a single dark thread from a tapestry of lies, and we have seen how it is woven into everything. This knowledge does not grant us peace. It grants us a terrible clarity. It is a heavy burden, but it is also a weapon. It is the light that the darkness cannot endure. Use it wisely. My investigation is not over. It is just beginning. There are other names in Finch's journal. Other families in the Stygian Fellowship. Their influence spreads far beyond Boston. It has roots in New York, in London, in the halls of power all over the world. The story of the Callahan sisters is just the first chapter. There are other experiments, other victims, other secrets buried just as deep. I will continue to follow the threads. I will continue to dig. I will not stop until the entire rotten edifice is exposed. But I cannot do it alone. This is too big for one person. It requires a collective effort, a community of seekers who are willing to look past the veil. This is my call to you. Don't be a passive viewer. Be an active investigator. Look into your own local histories. Look for the powerful families who seem to have no origin. Look for the strange coincidences, the convenient deaths, the erased records. The fellowship was not just in Boston. They had franchises. They had partners. The pattern is there if you know how to look for it. The symbol of the serpent and the lotus may appear in the most unexpected places. On an old cornerstone, in the design of a corporate logo, in the stained glass of a church window. These are their markers, their quiet declarations of ownership. They believe they own the past. They believe they own the future. It is time to show them that they are wrong. It is time to take our story back. The truth is a powerful and dangerous thing, but it is the only thing that will ever set us free. This story is my first offering. There will be more. The ghosts of the past have found a voice, and they will not be silenced again. The world is about to change. So, what are you left with? A dark tale of a forgotten corner of American history, but it's more than that, isn't it? You feel it. That cold knot of recognition in your gut. The feeling that this story, in some strange way, is true. Not necessarily every detail, every name, but the core of it. The idea of a hidden power, a secret knowledge, a system that operates just beyond our perception. This is a truth that resonates on a primal level. We have always suspected that the world is not what it seems. We have always felt like there were strings being pulled by unseen hands. The story of the Callahan sisters gives a name and a face to that feeling. It gives a framework to understand the things that don't make sense. And that is why it is so powerful. It validates a suspicion that has haunted humanity for millennia. The suspicion that we are not alone at the top of the food chain. That there are predators among us who look just like us, but who operate on a different set of rules with a different set of appetites. Predators who feed not on our flesh, but on our time, on our vitality, on our very future. This story is not meant to leave you with fear. It is meant to leave you with anger. A righteous anger. The anger of the deceived. The anger of the exploited. It is an anger that can be channeled into action, into vigilance, into a demand for the truth. The world is a dark and complex place, but it is not hopeless. The light of a single candle can push back a great darkness. Finch was a candle. Clara was a candle. Now, you are a candle. And together, we can create a fire that they will never be able to extinguish. This story is no longer just mine to tell. It is yours. The final chilling thought is this. The Stygian Society's greatest secret may not be the stasis technology itself. It may be what they've learned from it. For a century and a half, they have had a front-row seat to the slow, unchanging consciousness of the Callahan sisters. They have studied them, monitored them. What psychological insights have they gleaned from two souls trapped in time? They have learned how memory works, how personality is constructed, how the human mind can be contained, controlled, and even programmed. They have had a perfect isolated laboratory for mastering the science of psychological manipulation. The technology to control the body was just the first step. The true prize has always been the technology to control the mind. And that is a technology I believe they have perfected. It is the reason our world feels so confusing, so divided. It is the reason we are so easily distracted, so easily angered, so easily led into fighting amongst ourselves. We are living inside their grandest experiment. The lessons they learned from the two girls in the house on Beacon Hill are now being applied to the entire global population. They are keeping us all in a state of arrested development, trapped in loops of outrage and distraction. They are the singers of a new electronic nightingale song, and it is pinning us all down. The story of Elara and Isolde is not just a historical tragedy. It is a blueprint for our present reality. Their silent, timeless prison has been expanded to encompass you as all. Now, you know.